All right, so get ready, everyone, because today we are going deep, deep into the mitochondrial genome.
Oh, yeah, this will be fun.
You know the mitochondria, right?
Okay.
The powerhouses of the cell.
Right.
But did you know that they actually have their own DNA?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's like a whole other world tucked away inside our cells. Most people don't even realize it's there.
I know, I didn't for a long time. So let's start with the basics here. What does this mitochondrial genome actually look like?
Well, picture a tiny circular molecule.
Circular.
Yeah, just like bacterial DNA, actually, which is kind of a hint about where they came from. And when I say tiny, I mean TINY. Like, we're talking 16 kilobases in humans.
16 kilobases.
Compared to the billions of base pairs in our nuclear DNA.
Oh, wow, that's a huge difference.
No.
So what's packed into this tiny little instruction manual then?
Well, it might be small, but it's definitely mighty. The mitochondrial genome has the instructions for some pretty essential stuff. It codes for proteins, obviously. Those are the workhorses of the cell. But it also codes for the things you need to actually build those proteins inside the mitochondria itself, like ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA.
Ribosomal RNA, transfer
Prior
RNA.
RNA and tRNA. It's basically like having a mini protein factory right there inside the mitochondria.
So it's like self-sufficient in a way, building its own proteins right there on site.
Exactly. Yeah. And here's another interesting thing. The size of that mitochondrial genome can actually vary quite a bit between different organisms.
Really?
For example, the plant Arabidopsis thaliana
Arabidopsis thaliana.
has a mitochondrial genome over 20 times larger than ours.
Wow.
But it only codes for about twice as many proteins.
So a bigger genome doesn't always mean more proteins then.
You got it. And that actually gets to the heart of a lot of research going on right now. It turns out that a lot of DNA doesn't actually code for proteins at all. There are these big stretches of what we call non-coding DNA, and scientists are still trying to figure out what all of it does.
So some genomes might just have more of this non-coding DNA, even if they're not making that many more proteins.
Exactly. That's one theory, anyway. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the mitochondria for a sec. You mentioned that the shape of the mitochondrial genome kind of hints at its origins. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. The leading theory, you see, is that mitochondria were once free-living bacteria. Billions of years ago, they were engulfed by ancient cells.
Engulfed.
Yeah, like swallowed up. But instead of being digested, they formed this incredibly close partnership with the cells that engulfed them. And eventually, those bacteria became the mitochondria that we know and love today.
So like a symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. It's called endosymbiosis. And the mitochondrial genome, well, it's kind of like a living fossil. It carries these remnants of that ancient partnership from billions of years ago.
Wow. That's amazing. Mind officially blown. So this tiny genome is telling us a story about the history of life on Earth. You also mentioned some other unique things about this genome, like something about inheritance.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. One of the most unique features of mitochondrial DNA is that it's almost exclusively inherited from your mother.
From the mother.
Yep. Remember those ancient bacteria we were talking about? Well, when an egg cell is fertilized, it's the egg that contributes the majority of the cytoplasm. And that cytoplasm includes the mitochondria.
So all of my mitochondria came from my mom.
Pretty much, yeah. There are actually a few paternal mitochondria that enter the egg during fertilization, but they're usually destroyed. Or for the most part, yeah. Your mitochondrial DNA is a direct lineage from your mother, her mother, and so on back through the generations.
That's wild. It really makes you think about the connections between generations in a whole new way. But you also mentioned something about a high mutation rate. What's that about? Is that good or bad?
Well, it's complicated. The environment inside the mitochondria is pretty harsh. There are a lot of free radicals floating around, you know, those highly reactive molecules that can damage DNA.
Oh, yeah.
And that leads to a higher rate of mutations in mitochondrial DNA compared to nuclear DNA.
So it's constantly under attack.
You could say that. And sometimes those mutations can cause problems.
Problems? Like what kind of problems?
Well, sometimes those mutations can disrupt the mitochondria's ability to do its job, you know, to produce energy properly, and that can lead to a variety of health issues. We call them mitochondrial diseases.
Mitochondrial diseases? I've never heard of those.
They're not as well known as some other genetic diseases, but they can be pretty serious. They often affect tissues with high energy demands, like the brain muscles and the heart.
So if something goes wrong with the mitochondria's ability to produce energy, those vital organs start to suffer.
Exactly. One example is Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy.
Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy.
It can cause vision loss because of damage to the optic nerve. And remember that unique inheritance pattern we talked about.
Yeah, from the mother.
Right, because mitochondrial DNA is passed down from the mother. These diseases can be inherited through the maternal line.
Wow. So it's like a double whammy,
Yeah.
a higher chance of mutations, and this specific inheritance pattern. This is getting pretty heavy. Maybe we can lighten things up a bit. Earlier, we touched on how the mitochondrial genome is like a window into the history of life. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. One of the most fascinating things about the mitochondrial genome is that it actually uses a slightly different genetic code than what we call the universal code that's used by most organisms.
Wait, a different genetic code? I thought the code for translating DNA into proteins was, universal.
That's what we usually learn, but the mitochondrial genome likes to shake things up a bit. Remember how we talked about mitochondria having their own tRNA molecules?
Yes. Those little molecules that help assemble proteins inside the mitochondria.
Well, it turns out that human mitochondrial DNA only codes for 22 types of tRNA,
22.
while the universal code would require at least 30.
So it's working with a smaller toolkit.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really clever.
Yeah.
The mitochondrial system relies on this more flexible form of what we call wobble.
Wobble, does that mean the tRNA is like literally wobbling around?
No, not quite. Wobble refers to the ability of some tRNA molecules to recognize multiple codons in the messenger RNA. It's like having a master key that can unlock several different doors. And in the mitochondria, this wobble is even more pronounced, allowing a single tRNA to recognize up to 4 different codons.
Wow, so it's like this super efficient system getting more bang for its buck with a smaller set of tools.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, some codons in the mitochondrial genetic code actually specify different amino acids compared to the universal code.
So it's not just using fewer tRNA molecules, it's reinterpreting the code itself.
That's right. Pretty neat, huh?
That is pretty neat. I'm starting to see why the mitochondrial genome gets so much attention, especially for students preparing for exams like the NEET.
Oh yeah, it's a classic example of how evolution can lead to these really elegant solutions. Remember how we talked about mitochondria being semi-autonomous? They have their own DNA and can make some of their own proteins, but they still rely on the cell's nucleus for a lot of other functions.
So they're independent but still part of the team.
Exactly. And this semi-autonomous nature, along with that whole bacterial origin story, makes the mitochondrial genome a prime example of endosymbiosis, which is a key concept in evolutionary biology.
So understanding the mitochondrial genome helps you understand these bigger evolutionary processes.
Absolutely. It's a microcosm of the interconnectedness and complexity of life itself.
Amazing. This tiny genome is like a key that unlocks so many doors in biology, genetics, and evolution. What else can we learn from it?
One area that's getting a lot of attention these days is the role of the mitochondrial genome in aging.
Aging. Like
No.
wrinkles and gray hair.
Well, those are outward signs of aging, but at the cellular level, it's a lot more complicated. And there's growing evidence that mitochondria play a central role in all of that.
Okay, so how does the mitochondrial genome fit into all of this?
Remember that harsh environment we talked about inside the mitochondria? With all those free radicals?
Yeah.
Well, over time, that constant exposure to damage can really take a toll on the mitochondrial DNA.
So like wear and tear on the genetic machinery.
Exactly. As the mitochondrial DNA accumulates damage, the mitochondria become less efficient at producing energy, which can have a ripple effect throughout the entire cell and even the whole organism.
So faulty mitochondria could actually be contributing to the aging process. That's a little unsettling.
It's definitely a fascinating area of research, and scientists are working hard to understand all the intricate connections between mitochondrial DNA-damaged cellular aging and the overall aging process.
This is making me wonder if there's anything we can do to protect the mitochondria and maybe slow down aging.
That's a great question. And while there's no magic bullet, research suggests that lifestyle factors like exercise and diet can actually influence mitochondrial health.
Really? So hitting the gym and eating our veggies could actually benefit those tiny powerhouses inside our cells.
It seems that way. There's evidence that regular exercise can stimulate the production of new mitochondria and improve their function. And a diet rich in antioxidants can help protect them against those damaging free radicals.
This has given me a whole new perspective on healthy living. It's not just about looking good, it's about keeping those mitochondria happy.
Exactly. It's all about taking care of those microscopic powerhouses that keep us going.
This has been an absolutely incredible deep dive. We've gone from the basic structure of the mitochondrial genome to its role in inheritance diseases, evolution, and even aging.
It's amazing how much we can learn from this tiny, often overlooked genome. It really highlights the interconnectedness of life at all scales, from the molecular level to the organismal level.
Before we wrap things up, let's recap the key points from this deep dive. We talked about the potential role of the mitochondrial genome in aging, and how damage to this DNA can impact cellular function and contribute to the aging process. We also explored the exciting possibility that lifestyle choices like exercise and diet can actually influence mitochondrial health and potentially even slow down aging.
It's a powerful reminder that even though these processes happen at a microscopic level, they have huge implications for our health and well-being.
I couldn't agree more. So as we conclude this deep dive into the mitochondrial genome, I have one final question for our listeners. If our mitochondria have their own DNA, separate from our main DNA, what else might be lurking inside our cells holding secrets yet to be uncovered? And could further exploration of the mitochondrial genome hold the key to understanding aging, or even treating some diseases? Keep those questions in mind as you continue your own exploration of the fascinating world within our cells. That's it for this part of our deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of the mitochondrial genome. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, mitochondrial diseases?
Right. So those mutations we were talking about, they can sometimes cause some real problems for the mitochondria, like making it harder for them to produce energy efficiently.
And that leads to these mitochondrial diseases.
Yeah, exactly. And these diseases, they can be pretty serious.
Oh yeah?
They often affect the tissues that need a lot of energy, like the brain, muscles, the heart.
Oh, I see. So if those mitochondria aren't working properly, those organs can't get the energy they need.
Exactly. And that can lead to a whole range of symptoms depending on which tissues are affected.
So what kind of symptoms are we talking about here?
Well, it really varies, but it can be things like muscle weakness, fatigue, problems with vision or hearing.
Wow, that sounds pretty rough.
It can be, yeah. And it's often really hard to diagnose because the symptoms can be so diverse.
I bet. And I imagine it's even harder to treat since it's a problem with the cell's fundamental energy production.
You got it. There's no one-size-fits-all cure for mitochondrial diseases. Unfortunately, treatment often focuses on managing the symptoms and trying to support the mitochondria as much as possible.
Okay, so back to the mitochondrial genome itself. We talked about how it has that unique circular structure and that it's inherited from the mother. Can you remind me why that is again? It's pretty fascinating.
Sure. So remember, the mitochondria, they were once these free-living bacteria.
Right. Billions of years ago.
Exactly. And when those ancient bacteria were engulfed by other cells, they brought their own DNA with them. And that DNA became the mitochondrial genome that we see today.
Okay, so how did that lead to maternal inheritance?
Well, think about how fertilization works. You have the egg cell and the sperm cell, right?
Mm-hmm.
The egg cell is much larger than the sperm cell, and it contains a lot more cytoplasm. And guess what's in that cytoplasm?
The mitochondria.
Exactly. So when the sperm fertilizes the egg, it's mostly the egg's mitochondria that get passed on to the offspring. The sperm does contribute a few mitochondria, but they're usually destroyed pretty quickly.
So the mother's mitochondria are the ones that win out.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why we see this maternal inheritance pattern with mitochondrial DNA.
That's so cool. It's like a direct line from mother to child through the generations.
It is pretty amazing when you think about it. And it also means that mitochondrial diseases can be passed down from mother to child.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's definitely something to keep in mind, especially if there's a family history of mitochondrial diseases.
Absolutely. And it makes genetic counseling really important for families who might be at risk.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of the mitochondrial genome, its structure, inheritance, and how mutations can lead to diseases. What else is there to learn about this tiny but mighty genome?
Well, one thing I find particularly fascinating is how the mitochondrial genome is actually transcribed and translated. How that DNA code gets turned into proteins.
Oh, yeah. We haven't really talked about that yet. So how does it work?
Yeah.
Is it the same as with nuclear DNA?
Not exactly. There are some key differences that make the mitochondrial system really unique.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So you know how in the nucleus you have all these different types of RNA polymerase enzymes that are responsible for transcribing DNA into RNA?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the mitochondria, there's only one type of RNA polymerase.
Just one?
Yeah, it's a much simpler system. And that single RNA polymerase is responsible for transcribing all the genes in the mitochondrial genome.
Wow, so it's like a one-stop shop for transcription.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And the process of translation, where that RNA gets turned into protein, that's also a bit different in the mitochondria.
Oh.
Well, the mitochondria have their own set of ribosomes.
Ribosomes, those are the protein-making factory.
Exactly. And those mitochondrial ribosomes, they're smaller and simpler than the ribosomes in the cytoplasm.
Interesting. So the whole protein synthesis machinery is kind of like a miniature version in the mitochondria?
Yeah, and it uses a slightly different genetic code, too. Remember how we talked about how some codons in the mitochondrial genome code for different amino acids?
Oh, yeah, that was pretty mind-blowing.
Well, that's all part of this unique translation system that's evolved in the mitochondria. It's fascinating how they've managed to create this whole self-contained system for making proteins.
It really is. And it makes you wonder how all of these differences between the nuclear and mitochondrial systems came to be.
That's one of the big questions that researchers are trying to answer. It's likely that these differences reflect the evolutionary history of the mitochondria, how there were once free-living bacteria that eventually became part of eukaryotic cells.
So their ancient origins are still shaping how they function today.
Exactly, and it makes the mitochondrial genome a really valuable tool for studying evolution and understanding the deep connections between all living things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
This tiny genome is like a window into the history of life on Earth. Okay, so we've talked about how the mitochondrial genome is transcribed and translated. Now let's move on to something that I find particularly intriguing. The role of the mitochondrial genome in aging.
Ah, yes, aging. That's a big one and a hot topic in research these days.
Definitely. So how do the mitochondria fit into the whole aging process?
Well, there are a couple of ways. First, remember how we talked about how the environment inside the mitochondria is pretty harsh?
Yeah, with all those free radicals floating around.
Right. Well, over time, that constant exposure to free radicals can damage the mitochondrial DNA.
So it's like the DNA is getting rusty.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. And as the mitochondrial DNA accumulates damage, the mitochondria become less efficient at producing energy.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems, right? Like the cells don't function as well, tissues start to break down.
Exactly, and that can contribute to the aging process.
Okay, so damaged mitochondria can make us age faster. But is there anything we can do about it?
That's a great question. And there's a lot of research going on right now to try to answer it. But there are some things that we know can help protect our mitochondria.
Like what?
Well, exercise is a big one. Studies have shown that regular exercise can actually stimulate the production of new mitochondria.
Really? So getting those muscles working can actually help create more mitochondria?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And exercise can also improve the function of the mitochondria that we already have, so it's a win-win.
And what about diet? Does that play a role in mitochondrial health?
Absolutely. Eating a healthy diet rich in antioxidants can help protect your mitochondria from damage caused by free radicals.
So those colorful fruits and veggies are good for our mitochondria too?
Exactly. They're packed with antioxidants that can help neutralize those harmful free radicals.
This is giving me a whole new motivation to eat my greens.
It's all about taking care of those tiny powerhouses inside our cells. They do so much for us.
Okay, so we can help protect our mitochondria through lifestyle choices, like exercise and diet. But what about more advanced interventions? Is there anything else on the horizon that could help prevent or treat mitochondrial dysfunction?
That's a really exciting area of research. Right now, scientists are exploring a variety of different approaches, like gene therapy to try to correct mutations in the mitochondrial DNA.
Gene therapy, that sounds pretty futuristic.
It is cutting-edge stuff, but it holds a lot of promise for treating mitochondrial diseases. And there are other approaches, too, like developing drugs that can target specific pathways involved in mitochondrial function.
So there's a lot of hope for the future.
Definitely. It's a rapidly evolving field, and there are a lot of brilliant minds working on this problem.
That's great to hear. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's amazing how much we can learn from this tiny little genome.
It really is a testament to the power of scientific inquiry and the interconnectedness of all living things.
Absolutely. Well, before we move on to our final thoughts, let's recap what we've covered in this part. We discussed the clinical implications of mutations in the mitochondrial genome, highlighting how they can lead to various diseases. We also delved into the intricate processes of transcription and translation within the mitochondria, emphasizing their unique characteristics. And finally, we explored the fascinating link between mitochondrial DNA and aging, discussing both the challenges and the exciting prospects for interventions.
It's a reminder that even though we're focusing on a tiny part of the cell, its implications for our overall health and well-being are vast.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of amazing stuff regarding the mitochondrial genome, its structure, inheritance, diseases, and even aging. What else is there to uncover about this incredible little genome?
Well, one more fascinating aspect is thinking about the mitochondria not just as individual units, but as a dynamic network within the cell.
A network, like they're all connected somehow.
You got it. You see, mitochondria aren't just static structures. They're constantly dividing, fusing together, and changing their shape.
Wow, so they're pretty active.
Oh yeah, it's a dynamic dance, and it's essential for their function.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does the mitochondrial genome fit into this whole dance?
Well, when mitochondria fuse, they mix their contents, including their DNA.
So it's like they're swapping genes.
Exactly. It creates a diverse pool of mitochondrial genomes within the cell. And this process, it's known as mitochondrial fusion and fission.
Mitochondrial fusion and fission.
And it's crucial for maintaining a healthy population of mitochondria within the cell. You see, damaged mitochondria, they can be selectively removed through a process called mitophagy.
Mitophagy, that sounds intense.
It is, but it's essential for getting rid of those damaged mitochondria. And the healthy mitochondria, they can share their resources and genetic material to support the overall well-being of the cell.
So it's like a quality control system.
Yeah, a way to ensure that the cell has a healthy and functioning population of mitochondria.
It's incredible. It's like a whole ecosystem within the cell with its own rules and mechanisms for survival.
It really is. And it makes the study of the mitochondrial genome all the more fascinating. It's not just about understanding a single molecule of DNA. It's about understanding how that DNA interacts with the dynamic environment of the mitochondria and the cell as a whole.
Wow. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's amazing to think that this tiny, often overlooked genome plays such a vital role in so many aspects of life, from energy production to inheritance to aging. And now we see that it's even part of this intricate network within our cells.
It's a true testament to the power of evolution to create such elegant solutions to complex challenges. And as we continue to explore the mysteries of the mitochondrial genome, I have no doubt that we'll uncover even more fascinating insights into the workings of our cells and the story of life itself.
I can't wait to see what we discover next. It's been an absolutely incredible journey exploring the mitochondrial genome with you. And for our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about the hidden world within our cells. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never underestimate the power of the tiny. That's it for this deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another adventure in knowledge.